welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by the author of a collection of absolutely beautiful short stories across a number of genres and mixing genres and doing all sorts of interesting things with genre. I am so excited to talk about this book. Welcome to the show. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Hi, my name is Vanessa Fogg. I'm a writer from Grand Rapids, Michigan. The House of Illusionists is my debut collection of short stories, so I'm very excited to talk about it with Jen today. And Jen, thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us. I'd love to start with a question about your journey as a writer. When did you start writing? And I'm curious about the influence of your science training and writing, because I know that you, in some places, describe yourself as a lapsed freelance medical writer. So, yeah, could you talk about that a little bit?
So I guess I was one of those kids that was always writing, one of those kids that the moment she knows that there's such a thing as a book and that you can read it and read stories wants to make her own. So, I was one of those little kids that, would take pieces of paper and write stories and illustrate them myself with terrible illustrations and crayons and that kind of stuff. And I guess I didn't really grow out of that. As a teenager, I kept writing. There was a very long period of time when I didn't write for a long while because I was focused on trying to build a career as an academic research scientist. So the writing really lapsed during that time period. But then I came back to it when I was a new mother and I was taking a break from science. And I actually started a mommy blog, which I've taken down. You can't find it anywhere now. But it was a way to get back into writing, even though it wasn't fiction writing, but it was still a way to return to that practice of expressing myself. And then since, I had some time, I was doing a lot of reading at that point, and then I started writing short stories as well. So it was a nice way to get back into it.
Oh, very nice. That's so interesting. Um, what drew you to, what I've been referring to as genre fiction, especially, the boundaries between those genres. I love how these stories sort of like dip into different, genres and themes and topics and blend them all together. They do such interesting things.
Thanks. I guess I just always loved the magic of speculative fiction. When I started writing short stories again, I actually first started trying to write literary stories. But my literary stories always just had this little tinge of like, the kind of magical element to them, something that was kind of deniable but was just still there. And then I realized that that was what I really liked. So then I just started leaning into that very hard. And so now they're more overt. But I still like to think that I'm writing literary fantasy or literary speculative fiction.
Interesting. Um, so there are, so many stories that we could talk about in here, 17 to be precise. But I'd love to start with the first one, Wild Ones. It's absolutely beautiful. And before I ask about the story itself, I'm really curious about what goes into picking what story comes first in a collection? Is it about the tone that you want to establish, or is it about a feeling in the reader? How do you make that decision?
That is a really good question. And I think you're right. For me, it was about a tone, about a reading I wanted to establish. And I wanted to say, this is the kind of story you're going to find when you open my collection. I thought it was one of my strongest stories. It's one of my favorite stories. And it addresses a lot of the themes that run through my work.
Mhm. Definitely. It's really dreamlike and oh gosh, how do you even describe it? Like it's really dreamlike and beautiful, but also heartbreaking. And it does combine a lot of the feelings that like you're going to feel while you read this book. What was the inception point for this story? Was it an image or a character or perhaps a bit of world building? Where did it all start?
I think it was a bit of an image. And I've just always loved the story of the wild hunt, that myth of the fairies just running rampant through the sky. And fall is my favorite color, and I think I just had an image of a fairy queen all dressed up, in fall with leaves in her hair and eyes of green, and that's how it came about.
Mm. It's so beautiful and it is very sad. And I think that you balance just the different moods and the different images so well. And it really, I think, in some ways, I wonder if this was your aim. Were you using that story to sort of explore like the fears of parenthood or like what do you feel like you were, exploring, trying to figure out with that one?
Very, very much so, very much so. It's about the fears of parenthood, of seeing your child grow up and knowing that you have to let them go. But it's also about, a woman's own feelings for her lost youth and the life that she had or could have without children and domestic responsibilities and family. And one interesting thing is that that latter theme is something that seems to appeal to a lot of readers that are about my age. And I've heard a lot of feedback from them about that.
Absolutely. Yeah, without, really spoiling anything, I think there is something about like reaching the stage of life where I am too, is like where you sort of get a little bit sad that it's like, oh, we don't really get as many call to adventures as we used to, you know?
Yes.
Yeah. So that was one that I loved. And perhaps my favorite in the whole collection was The Message. I connected with that one so deeply as somebody who grew up, in the 90s on the very early stages of the internet in fan fiction communities. Can you talk about that story a little bit and what you were aiming for?
I that is one of the themes of that story, I
Mm.
guess, of, fan fiction and writing stories to communicate. I think we're about relatively the same age, so I remember that period, when the internet was just coming online in the 1990s and people were making friendships that way. So that was it. And I guess, the whole idea of that story is about connection, connection on our planet and, the search for a connection off planet, which is what the narrator's mother is trying to do. And I think I remember reading some article a long time ago about some scientist, who's trying to, involved in SETI or something like that, trying to look for signs of life elsewhere in the universe, who was upset about the research funding being cut. And it was from that the seed of this story grew, because I thought, what if you actually did discover that? And then the research funding was cut, and then everyone just forgot all about it.
Yeah. Oh, another like, yeah, really heartbreaking in a totally different realm, like a scientific sort of our humanity realm. Um, I really loved it. And there was, I wondered too, there's a phrase that you return to every once in a while of I want to believe, and I don't know if that was indicative of the fan fiction that you were reading at the time, but it certainly is for me. That reminded me of the X-Files and sort of the poster in Mulder's office.
Yeah,
So
that was one of my favorite shows too.
nice. And you know what? I think that show is like a really does a lot of the same things with genre that you do because X-Files would dip into like sci-fi. It would dip into a straight up horror or like
Yeah.
folklore fantasy type inspired,
Mhm.
supernatural creatures. So yeah, it's a really nice a nice connection. That's why I connected with that story, perhaps. Um, Let's see. Oh, I'm curious for you, a two-part question. Is there a story that you feel like um was the easiest to write, like it just flowed out of your pen or your keyboard that sort of was let's say the least struggle? And the flip side, was there a story that was the most challenging or one that was like the toughest nut to crack?
Oh gosh, that's a hard question. Give me a moment while I actually look at the table of contents
Oh, sure.
of the book right now. I would say that I remember that I think Taya, I think that's the fourth story in the collection about a ghost. That came really quickly for me, and that's kind of unusual. I usually have a more difficult time with that. And normally a lot of stories come a lot harder for me, so I don't know if I can actually single out one that was actually particularly hard there.
I'm always kind of curious about like, yeah, like when you read a collection of stories, you're um reading like a whole bunch of different writing efforts, and each story had not only its own arc, like in story terms, but sort of in the experience of writing. I know that, or I think I read that most of these were published in magazines first. Is that so?
Yeah.
I'm curious about what else goes into like when you are choosing stories for a collection. Um, how do you go about picking which pieces, what order they go in beyond the first? And do you go into it with a theme in mind, or does a theme emerge like from you looking at the pieces, if that makes sense?
Those are all really good questions. So for me, Interstellar Flight Press just happened to have a submissions call for short stories. So I decided that I wanted to apply, and I sat down and picked like I think maybe four, five, or six of my favorite stories, the ones that I thought were the strongest and were kind of a must-have. And then when I looked at them all together, then themes just kind of naturally emerged. So after that, I picked stories that kind of went along with that theme that seemed a good fit. This means that there were some stories that I liked, but I thought just threw the tone of the collection off too much. And yeah, so that's kind of, centering, some very strong stories and then building the collection around that. And I think a story is like making a playlist for yourself. There might be some kind of standard theme, like, oh, this is my exercise playlist, or this is like relaxing playlist, but you want some variation within that playlist too. So I try to vary up the stories in order as well, in terms of like tone, mood, theme, and plot and genre.
Nice. I love that analogy of the playlist. That makes so much sense to me. Yeah, because even though you're listening to individual songs or reading an individual story, you want it to convey like an overall sort of emotional journey or experience. So yeah, that's so cool. Do the stories appear like untouched as they did upon their first publication, or do you ever dip back in and revisit your old writing? I'm curious about like, revisiting things that you have published over time and like looking at your own writing again.
Yeah, I know some people would do that, but I believe that all the stories, yeah, in this collection were just untouched. The republished as they originally published.
Hmm. That's cool because then you get like a little time capsule effect, I think, is like this
Yes.
like a snapshot of a particular moment, not like
Yeah.
a continual work in progress.
Mhm.
Nice. Um, my final question has to do with choosing a name for a volume. I'm sorry if this is a very sort of craft heavy interview. So curious
No,
about
I love craft questions.
um, so the title, The House of Illusionists, is, gorgeous, and it's also the name of one of the stories that appears. So I'm curious about like what goes into choosing that title. Is that choice of title indicative of like you thinking that story sort of um not speaks for the volume, but like most captures the essence of what you're trying to communicate? Like what is that choice like?
I did think The House of Illusionists was one of my strongest stories. It was the story that I chose to end the collection with. And I did name the collection after it because I thought not that necessarily that, it encapsulated all the themes of the collection, but because I think it set a good mood at the end for what I started to develop in the second part of the collection, which was just the theme of, both the power of stories and storytelling, but also the limits of what they can achieve.
That's really beautiful. Yeah, I do love the partitioning of the book into closer worlds and farther worlds. It's just like a really lovely, um, even more that like as a short story collection, it also feels like, to continue our analogy, like a musical movement. It's really, really
Mhm.
beautiful. So thank you for sharing it with me and with our listeners.
Thank you so much.
Welcome. What's next for you? Are you writing at the moment? Do you foresee publishing more short stories in a collection in the future?
Maybe I hope to keep publishing short stories. I'm trying to work on something now, but I'm procrastinating as usual. And I hope that if I have enough, I can put another collection out there.
Oh, excellent. I know it's probably hard to write while you're also, promoting a book, so I that makes sense. But thank you for taking the time from your busy schedule.
Oh,
And listeners, please go and check out the House of Illusionists and other stories so that we could see more stories, because I think these are absolutely beautiful reads as individual pieces and as a set. And yeah, I want to see more of them. So help us out by checking this book out. You can find it at your favorite bookstore, library, website. Do you have a favorite bookstore or a place that you like to send people for books?
Oh, well, I have some favorite indie bookstores here in Grand Rapids. So if you are ever in Grand Rapids, I don't know who's listening to this, those two very cute sister bookstores. One is called Orchard House Books, and the other is called Plumfield Books. So if you're ever in, stop in.
Nice. Excellent. Thank you. Okay, it is time to close this chapter. Thank you all for joining us.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.